that whatever we have been discussing over here is about the background of the play. The versions of the play after migrating to the United States from Hitler's Germany with the stopovers in various other countries. We started with what of his name, German dramatist Bertolt Brecht, and incidental music by Hans Essler. Theatrical production at the Zurich Schauspielhaus, Schauspielhaus. Sometimes they said short questions from over here. The second American version was written in English between 1945 and 47 in collaboration with Charles Lawton and opened at the Coronet Theatre in Los Angeles on 30th July 1947. Since 1955, Brecht prepared a third version, a production by the Berliner Ensemble with the Ernest Bach in the title role. Ensemble, whatever way you pronounce it, means together, all formed together. Was directed by Eric Angel. Was set designed by Caspar Nihar. The play was first published in 1940. The action of the play follows the career of the great Italian natural philosopher Galileo Galilei and the Galileo affair in which he was tried by the Roman Catholic Church for the promulgation of his scientific discoveries. So the play embraces such themes as the conflict between dogmatism and scientific evidence, as well as interrogating the values of constancy in the face of oppression. Version of the play, after migrating to the United States from Hitler's Germany with stopovers in various other countries, in between among them in the USSR, Brecht translated and reworked the first version of his play in collaboration with the actor Charles Lawton. The result of the effort was the second American version of the play, entitled simply Galileo, which to this day remains the most widely staged version in the English-speaking world. This version differed in tone from the original as Brecht felt that the optimistic portrait of the scientific project present in the first version required revision in a post-Hiroshima world, where science's harmful potential had become more apparent. This second version formed the basis for the Losse's 1975 film adaptation to American Film Theatre under the title Galileo with Topol in the title role. So Galileo, an eminent professor and scientist in the 17th century Venetian Republic, is short of money. A prospective student tells him about a novel invention, the telescope, a queer tube thing that has been sold in Amsterdam. Galileo replicates it and offers it to the Republic of his own creation. True or not, we do not know. History says it. So he gains an increase in his salary, but within a short time, his ruse is discovered that he has stolen the concept. Galileo then uses the telescope for careful observation of the moon and the planets, and he discovers the moon's orbiting orbit. His observations strongly support Nicolaus Copernicus' heliocentric model of the solar system, which is counter both to popular belief and to the doctrine of the powerful Roman Catholic Church. He furthermore publishes in vernacular Italian. His daughter's engagement to a well-off young man with whom she is genuinely in love is broken because of Galileo's reluctance, unwillingness to distance himself from his unorthodox teaching. If you don't follow the church, you are unorthodox. Galileo is brought to the Vatican in Rome for interrogation by the Inquisition. Inquisition is in charge of the church. So upon being threatened with torture, he recants his teaching. His students are shocked by surrender in the face of pressure from the church authorities. Galileo, old and broken, now living under house arrest with a priest monitoring his activities, is visited by one of his former pupils, Andrea. Galileo gives him a book, Two New Sciences, containing all his scientific discoveries, asking him to smuggle it out of Italy for dissemination abroad. Andrea now believes Galileo's actions were heroic and that he just recanted to fool the ecclesiastical authorities, the church authorities. However, Galileo insists his action had nothing to do with heroism, but were merely the result of self interest. So, then, if we come to the historical background, the play stays generally faithful to Galileo's science and timeline thereof, but significant liberties with his personal life. Galileo, in fact, used a telescope, observed the moons of Jupiter, advocate for the heliocentric model, observed sunspots. The other day I told you what is heliocentric, that the earth is flat and revolves around the sun, but that is not true. Investigates the buoyancy and writes on physics, and did visit the Vatican twice to defend his work. The second time being made to recant his view and being confined to house arrest thereafter. So, one significant liberty that is taken is the treatment of Galileo's daughter, Virginia Gamba, Sister Maria Celeste, who Celeste, who rather than becoming engaged, was considered unmarriageable by her father and confined to a convent from the age of 13. Forcibly confined to torture, and further died of dysentery shortly after her father's recantation. However, Galileo was close with Virginia and they corresponded extensively. Now, there are allusions to this story. There are a number of allusions to Galileo's science and to Marxism, which are not further elaborated in the play. Some of these are glossed below, which I will be mentioning to you. So, the discussion of price versus value was a major point of debate in the 19th century economics under the terms exchange value versus use value. Within Marxian economics, this is discussed under the labor theory of value. So, more subtly, Marx is sometimes interpreted as advocating technological determinism. Technological progress determines social change, which is reflected in the telescope, a technological change being the root of the scientific progress and hence social unrest. So the mention of tides refers to Galileo's theory that the motion of the earth caused the tides, which would give the desired physical proof of the earth's movement and which is discussed in his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, whose working title was Dialogue of the Tides. In actuality, Galileo was wrong. Kepler correctly believed that the moon's gravity caused the tides. The bent wooden rail in Science 13, and the discussion that the quickest distance between 2 points need not be a straight line, though a straight line offers the shortest path. The fastest descent of a rolling ball, in fact, follows a curve, alludes to Galileo's investigation of the brachy- brachistochrone. This means, in the context of the quickest descent from a point to a wall, which he incorrectly believed to be given by a quarter circle. Instead, the brachistochrone is a half cycloid, which was only proven much later with the development of calculus. So, the life of Galileo summary would be as such. Opens on Galileo Galilei, a professor of mathematics at Padua University. He's talking to Andrea, his housekeeper's young son, who has just brought him breakfast. They're discussing the solar system and how it works. Galileo shows Andrea a wooden model that illustrates the current generally accepted understanding of the planets. In it, the Earth is in the middle of the universe and is surrounded by eight crystal spheres. These spheres represent the moon, the sun, and all the planets. People have believed this model for 2000 years, Galileo says, but as mankind progresses in technology and knowledge, he suspects they won't believe it for much longer. He touches the idea of Nicholas Copernicus to Andrea, who calls Copernicus Copernicer, Knickers, not Copernicus. The new ideas place the sun at the center of the solar system with the earth and the planets revolving around it. And that is true. All of the stars in the sky, are at the center of their own system. Galileo uses the wooden model as well as a series of common sense demonstrations with an apple to show Andrea how Copernicus' theory could be true. Andrea believes him somewhat but also questions Galileo whenever an argument seems weak. When Andrea's mother, Mrs. Sarti, arrives, now what happens, what Galileo is teaching, Andrea, since it goes against the church's approved model and could therefore get Andrea into trouble at school. Throughout all this, another concern repeatedly appears money. Galileo doesn't have any, but he needs it, not just to continue his research, but buy books, but also to do simple tasks while like play the milkman, which he is not able to do. So when Ludovico arrives, hoping to hire Galileo on as a tutor, Mrs. Sarti insists that Galileo accept the offer. He does, though not happily. Shortly afterwards, Galileo's supervisor at Padua University, the procurator they call, procurator, arrives to tell Galileo that his recent request for a raise has been denied, raise of his salary. The procurator suggests that if the mathematician needs more money than his teaching job provides, he should invent something useful. He reminds Galileo that while Padua and more broadly Venice might not pay at it much, it at least offers freedom from persecution with the church, which he might experience in others, better funded places like Florence. Galileo responds that such freedom of thought may be nice, but it is meaningless if he spends all of his free time working to make ends meet instead of thinking. He says, my students can't get enough of your charts and the results have gone through the roof. Ludovico, however, provides a possible solution to Galileo's problem. A new invention by the Dutch called the telescope. It is all unheard of in Italy, but Ludovico has seen it to wondrous uses abroad. Galileo instantly understands the mechanics behind the device and quickly replicates one, pawning it off as his own original invention. That brought him danger, criticism. The procurator, seeing the great many uses that the telescope could be put to, guarantees Galileo his raise. Shortly thereafter, however, a Dutch merchant arrives in Venice with a boatload of telescopes, and Galileo's deception is revealed. It doesn't matter though, he has already used the telescopes to empirically prove Copernicus' theory, which he had previously only been able to prove theoretically being mathematics. Using mathematics, he excitedly tries to show this proof to his friend Sagredo, but Sagredo only reminds him that a man was burned at the stake for quoting Copernicus only a few months before. The church used to burn at stake whoever they did not like. So, undeterred, Galileo remains confident that the church will be able to. Joan of Arc, the same thing would happen. They'll be unable to avoid the truth when it's right before their eyes. The confidence causes him to move to Florence, where, despite being under strict religious censure, he believes he will have the time and money to explore his findings. With Galileo newly settled in Cosimo Medici, the Grand Duke of Florence, who is still just a child, is brought by his counselors to see the telescope at work. Among Cosimo's party are a theologian, a mathematician, and a philosopher. All of them are wholly skeptical of Galileo's latest findings, and after some heated debate with him, they decide that he is just a waste of time at best, if not an outright lunatic. In the end, they won't even look through the telescope to see the simple, observable evidence that Galileo presents as proof. So, naturally, you can very well understand, though they do agree in a way that seems less than sincere, to present Galileo's transformation to the church's chief scientist, Clavius his name. Shortly thereafter, a deadly plague rips through Florence. Galileo, his daughter Virginia, Mrs. Sarti, and Andrea are given the chances to flee, but Galileo declines it, citing his need to work. Mrs. Sarti decides to stay behind with him, but they send Virginia and Andrea away. Andrea, however, opts to return despite the danger so that he can continue assisting Galileo. All manage to avoid the plague, and Galileo soon finds himself at the Vatican awaiting Clavius's review of his work. The scene plays out in much the same way that the confrontation in Florence did. The church's scholars are simply too dedicated to the church's existing understanding of the universe to entertain alternatives. They all feel that Galileo's telescope is a dangerous object and that his questioning of age old wisdom is even more dangerous. A kind of fever overtakes the discussion at one point. An older cardinal faints while, while berating, berating Galileo, making lowly of Galileo. Nevertheless, the scene ends with Clavius confirming that Galileo is correct. His words are followed up by deadly silence. Though Galileo understandably feels that his work has been vindicated by Clavius, he soon discovers the Inquisition by the Church has other ideas. They have decided that Copernicus remains heretical and cannot be taught. Paradoxically, though, they have accepted Galileo's findings. What this means is that the Church has decided to allow Galileo to continue his research and continue to publish it to the outside world. Galileo is upset by this, but also slightly overwhelmed. He is, after all, a devout Catholic who doesn't wish to go against the Church, and these orders come from the highest levels of authority. In the following scenes, the little monk visits Galileo. He has looked through a telescope and observed the same things that Galileo has said. The discovery has shaken his faith, and in order to recover that faith, he has decided to abandon astronomy. He visits Galileo to explain why, perhaps in an effort to convince Galileo to do the same. The long conversation doesn't go quite as planned. However, and Galileo ends up converting the little monk into one of his own students by offering him his manuscript. Galileo compares these to an apple from the tree of knowledge, something he knows the little monk won't be able to resist. Kept from publishing, Galileo has instead spread his knowledge to his students, who now include the little monk Andrea and Galileo's telescope lens manufacturer Federzoni. Meanwhile, the Pope is dying, and it seems likely that his successor will be Cardinal Barberini, a mathematician with whom Galileo has had a favorable interactions in the past. Assuming that Barberini will be far more receptive for his work than the previous Pope, Galileo resumes publication. His ideas spread far and wide seemingly overnight. He even becomes the subject of ballads sung at public fairs and carnivals. Naturally, this catches the eye of the Inquisition, who summoned Galileo to the Vatican. While Barberini does indeed agree with Galileo, the politics behind supporting him are just too risky and complicated. Therefore, the new pope has given the Inquisition the right to imprison Galileo and even to threaten him with torture in order to force him to renounce his work. Their plans succeed and Galileo recants his doctrine. His students can hardly believe it, and they turn their backs on him. They feel that Galileo has abandoned the hard work and important work to save his own skin. Nearly a decade passes. Galileo has been imprisoned in his home by the Inquisition and will remain so for the rest of his life. He is forced to write dissertations approving the Church's opinion on a number of banal matters, all of them below his ability. These texts are carefully checked by a monk for any heresies they might contain, and any other writing in faults forbidden. Nevertheless, Galileo has, in the secret, finished his magnum opus, the Discourses, his famous, and mathematical demonstrations related to two new sciences, also his famous book. One day, Andrea comes to visit the first of his old people to do so. At first, Andrea is cold towards his old mentor. So, you see, he's cold to his old mentor. Rather, he recanted it so that he could continue it in secret. With Andrea's help, Galileo manages to sneak the discourse out of the country and to Holland, where it is published without censures. So we start the drama of Galileo, the life of Galileo. In 1609, in scene 1, we get it. In Padua, Italy, Galileo Galilei is at home in study with the American Sati, his assistant and the son of the Galileo's housekeeper. His housekeeper, Mrs. Sati, enters to deliver a package sent from the court of Naples. The delivery is an astronomical instrument, which Andrea asks Galileo to explain to him. Galileo describes the instrument's representation of the contemporary understanding of the cosmos. The instrument's eight metal bands correspond to the eight crystal globes that encircle the Earth, contain the stars, and revolve around the stationary Earth, represented by a fixed ball in the center. Galileo tells Andrea that this concept of the cosmos is outdated and suggests that people will soon recognize that the Earth revolves around the Sun. Mrs. Sati enters again to introduce a young gentleman, Ludovico Marcelli, who wishes to take lessons from Galileo. Ludovico has recently returned from study in the Netherlands, though he says that he understood little of the research and invention his teachers are conducting there. Ludovico is, however, able to describe a recently invented tubular instrument with two glasses that magnifies things that are far away. Galileo seeks to understand that this new device, while Ludovico continues to discuss his potential studies with Galileo. The curate of the university enters and Galileo quickly asks to borrow a scudo, a silver coin from him. Galileo gives the borrowed coin to Andrea and sends him to buy a pair of glass lenses. Andrea leaves and the curator tells Galileo that the university has denied the scientist's request for a salary. Galileo, in response, tells the curator that he may have an invention that might interest the city's businessmen. The curator indicates that if the businesses are able to profit from the invention, it may be worth some money for Galileo. So the curator exists and Andrea returns with the lenses. Galileo holds the lenses in the arrangement of a telescope, and Andrea is amazed at what he can see. Now we come to the next scene, the astronomer Galileo Galilei, his daughter Virginia Galilei, and his friend and assistant Sagredo stand at the great arsenal in Venice, Italy. They've arrived to present Galileo's new invention. That is, the telescope he has created according to the description of the Dutch telescope provided to him by Ludovico Marcelli in Scene 1. The curate explains to the gathered senators about this whole thing, about this whole invention. But the question is how much it is believed by the people. While the curators speak, Galileo and Sagredo have a conversation on the side about the discoveries that he has already made. Galileo tells him that he has discovered that the moon does not produce its own light and that he now knows that makes up the Milky Way. At the end of the presentation, curator tells Galileo that after all he has earned a generous salary from the university. After the curator's presentation, a prosperous Florentine man named Matti, who owns a foundry that produces cast iron products, approaches Galileo with an offer of employment. But Galileo refuses him. Senators are amazed as they test out the telescope. Virginia brings Ludovico to Galileo, where they discuss the presentation. Ludovico implies that he knows Galileo's invention is modeled after the instrument he described, but Virginia remains unaware of the intellectual theft. So we go to the next scene. Back in Galileo Galilei study in Padua in 1610, Galileo and his friend and assistant Sagredo used the telescope to study the moon. Galileo shows Sagredo that the surface of the moon contains mountains and valleys that catch the light of the sun and the moon rotates, thus proving that the moon is not a star. Galileo hints at further discoveries, but the curator arrives, angrily accusing Galileo of deceiving the Venetian Senate by selling his telescope and his own unique invention, even though the Dutch all had already invented it. After the curator leaves, Sagredo asks if Galileo knew that the Dutch had invented the telescope. Galileo responds that he did, but his was better, and besides, I needed the money, he said. They return to the subject of research. So, with Galileo showing Sagredo the stars of the Milky Way and moon that revolve around Jupiter, this last observation proves that the ancient conception of the universe, a stationary Earth surrounded by a crystal orbs that hold up the stars, cannot be held. Sagredo begins to realize the implication of Galileo's observation and wonders, where is God in your system of the universe? So Galileo claims that he is concerned with maths, not theology, not God, and that the truth of the visible observations will conquer all challenges. So Galileo's daughter Virginia enters, awake early because she is on her way to Mass with one of the Galileo students, Ludovico, and the Galilee's housekeeper, Mrs. Sati. She chastises Galileo for staying up all night working, and Galileo responds that he has found exciting new things. He plans to name the moon of Jupiter that he has just discovered the Medicean planets after the Prince of Florence, Cosimo II of the Medici family. With this gesture, Galileo aims to obtain a paid position in the Medici court. So he writes a letter to inform the prince of his discovery. Sagredo warns Galileo that he is courting disaster and even execution by promoting theories that run counter in the Catholic teaching, saying, can you see the Pope scribbling a note in his diary? 10th of January in 1610. Heaven abolished. So changes were taking place very fast. When we go to scene 4, having this achieved a position at the court of the Florence and received a well appointed home there, Galileo Galilei received the Prince of Florence, Cosimo II, Cosimo di Medici, along with his court and some professors, including a professor Galileo and his assistants. Andrea Sati and Zoni encouraged members of the court to look through the telescope and see the truth with their own eyes. The professor challenges the discoveries, arguing variously that what can be seen may not be true, that what Galileo claims cannot be possible according to Aristotle, and that Galileo should be worried about where his discoveries will lead. Galileo continues to ask them to observe the truth. Eventually, the prince is called to another appointment, and everyone leaves without looking through the telescope. The scene ends with the prince's Lord Chamberlain telling Galileo that the prince will hear the counsel of Christopher Clavius, the chief astronomer of the Papal College in Rome. Next, we find that as it follows in summary 5 in 1611, Galileo attends a meeting in the Collegium Colomanum, a Roman Catholic university in Rome, and encounters various religious figures who are critical of his theories. Galileo sits by himself in a corner while monks and cardinals quote passages from the Bible and they interpret as incompatible with Galileo's findings. At the end of the scene, Christopher Clavius, chief astronomer to the Papal College in Rome, walks on stage with his entourage of astronomers. As he passes, Clavius says he's right. The official finding upholds Galileo's research. So Galileo initially appears to be successful. Now, in the next scene, we find in scene 6, still in Rome, Galileo attends an event at the house of Cardinal Bellarmine with his daughter Virginia Galilei and the pupil Ludovico Marcelli. Galileo and Virginia celebrate Christopher Clavius' confirmation of Galileo's discoveries. Ludovico continues to express some skepticism of Galileo's theories. Cardinal Bellarmine and Cardinal Barini, later Pope Urban VIII, enter and begin to converse with Galileo. Cardinal Barberini apparently enjoys sparring with Galileo and he instructs the secretaries following him and Cardinal Bellarmine not to take any notice as this is a scientific discussion among friends. Cardinal Bellarmine is more dismissive and requests the secretaries to take notes as he begins a formal discussion presenting news from the Holy Office of the Papacy. Bellarmine asks the secretary to read a decree that the Copernican theory that the earth revolves around the sun is foolish, absurd, and heresy. Galileo is warned to abandon these teachings. The censure takes Galileo by surprise, and Bellarmine responds to him that science should follow the church. The secretary delivered the report of the conversation to the papal inquisitor, the man in charge of investigating the heresies, who reads through their notes. The inquisitor stops Virginia, who happens to be passing by. He congratulates her on her engagement to Ludovico Marcelli and speaks with her about her father and her priest. After learning she is a good Christian, the inquisitor tells her that her father will need her in the coming days. Now, scene 7 in Rome, the garden of the Florentine ambassador of Rome. Galileo Galilei meets with his friend and assistant who is called simply the little monk. The little monk claims that he has also observed what Galileo has observed, and yet he challenges Galileo's idea that these theories should be made available to the public. He argues that free research is dangerous to society. If the peasants had no religion to sustain them, their tiring and difficult lives would lose all meaning. Galileo eventually feels beaten in this argument and throws the manuscript on the ground. The little monk asks what it is and begins to read it. He asks Galileo to explain a sentence he doesn't understand, and he is drawn up into the quest. for scientific knowledge. Now you think say that when we pass over to scene 8, in 1623, Galileo's daughter Virginia Galilei and his housekeeper Mrs. Sarti discuss Virginia and her fiancé Ludovico's horoscope and upcoming marriage. Galileo is in study in Florence, studying floating bodies and struggling to avoid the kind of research that was censured by the Vatican. The reactor of the university brings Galileo a new treatise on sunspots dedicated to Galileo by the author. His assistants begin to discuss the origin of the sunspots, but Galileo restrains himself. The other guesses that he does so because researching the sunspots would lead him to discuss the heliocentric nature of the universe and he fears papal retribution. Ludovico arrives unannounced, followed by servants with baggage, but Galileo does not recognize him at first, and the little monk asks him what is wrong with his eyes. Virginia leaves because she has something to show to Ludovico. The discussion turns to the uh, expected rise of the Cardinal Barberini, a mathematician, to the papal seat. Galileo hopes that this means of the uh, change and begins to take up the subject of the sunspots. Ludovico cautions Galileo that even a scientist pope cannot support Galileo's theory because of the detrimental effects of the common people. Ludovico threatens to break his engagement to get Virginia if Galileo continues his research. Galileo reveals that he has been satisfying the sunspots already, which the little monk had guessed by his poor eyesight. Galileo considers aloud whether to write his research in the common language instead of Latin so that it would be available to the masses. Ludovico excuses himself without seeing Virginia again, with whom his engagement is implicitly broken. It is very natural that this would lead to that. The consequences would lead to it. So in scene 9, several years later in 1632, Galileo Galilei theories have spread so far throughout Italy that they are a subject of discussion and strong among common people in the marketplace. A ballad singer and his wife sing about Galileo's theories and directly discuss the impact on the common people while various other characters mill about on the stage. Now, in scene 10, we find that in 1632, at the Medicean Palace in Florence, Galileo Galilei and his daughter Virginia wait to see Galileo's patron and former student, the Florentine prince Cosimo di Medici, his real name, full name. The rector of the university passes them as he leaves the chamber, but he only slightly acknowledges the two. The Florentine iron founder Matty comes down the stairs next and stops to talk to them, professing his support for Galileo theories and lumping them in with the several movements and ideas that are subversive to the Catholic Church and social structure of Italy. So after Matty leaves, Galileo complains that his proponents of such ideas claim, what does he say? Claim me as the spiritual leader, even though this science has little to do with their revolutionary ideas. The Prince's Lord Chamberlain approaches Galileo and Virginia, and Galileo begins to say that he will dedicate his new book to the Prince. But the Lord Chamberlain cuts him off, does not accept the book, and walks away. As he leaves, the Lord Chamberlain informs Galileo that the prince will no longer protect Galileo by opposing an interrogation request from the inquisitor, the man changed by the Pope to investigate heresy. So you see how Galileo is reaching to a very confusing state in scene 11 in the Vatican. Cardinal Barberini, now Pope Urban VIII, converses with the papal inquisitor who is tasked with investigating heresies. They discussed the potential interrogation of Galileo while servants dressed the Pope in formal garments for a meeting. The Pope is at first defensive of Galileo, but the Inquisitor arguments slowly convince him that the security and stability of the Catholic Church and its flock require Galileo to refute his previous teachings. By the end of the scene, Pope Urban VIII has to the Inquisitor, accused to the Inquisitors plan to interrogate Galileo. But Galileo, he dictates that Galileo must not be tortured in order to convince him to recant. So at the very most, he may be shown the instrument. The Inquisitor tells the Pope that seeing the instrument that will be enough since Mr. Galileo understands machinery. Now, after this, further when we enter into scene 12, June 22, 1633, the astronomer Galileo Galilei assistants, the little monk Paradiso and Andrea Sarti, wait for the news, but Galileo in the gardens of the Florentine ambassador at Rome. Galileo's daughter Virginia prays in a corner. Galileo has been taken away by the papal inquisitor who is investigating whether his theories and discoveries constitute heresy. According to Catholic Church, the assistant trade rumors and gossip regarding what is happening to Galileo and argue about whether he will recant his teaching. The informer, a man who has been given information to the investigation, arrives and tells them that Galileo has written a recantation that will be read publicly at 5 o'clock. The predicted time passes with no announcement, and the assistant rejoices. Soon, however, the bell of the St. Marcus begins to ring, and a town crier reads out the words of Galileo's recantation. Galileo has entered the gardens, changed and unrecognizable. The assistants see him and react to his presence with anger and unhappiness, refusing to acknowledging him. Then what we see is that in a country house near Florence in scene 13, sometime in the years 1633 or 1642, when the astronomer Galileo Galilei was a prisoner of the Inquisition, a peasant delivers a goose to the house that Galileo lives with his daughter Virginia. Virginia notices that Galileo's eyesight is getting worse as he is distinctively recognizing the goose. Difficulty in recognizing the goose. Galileo, she says, dictates all of his research to her, and the papacy watches his teachings carefully. The Vatican allows him to continue his research but limits it to appropriate topic. His former assistant Andrea Sarti stops by to visit him but reveals his continued displeasure with Galileo's recantation. Andrea claims that not a single innovative paper has been written in Italy since Galileo's recantation, and that science in other countries has also slowed. Galileo asks Virginia to leave the room and reveals to Andrea that he has finished a treatise called the Discorsi. Galileo gives the treatise to Andrea to smuggle out of Italy. Andrea concludes that Galileo was planning ahead when he recanted, gaining more time to research, even if publicly disapproving his previous work. Galileo indicates that he was simply afraid of the torture and that his recantation was not a plan, expressing regrets for betraying science by recanting. Of course, in scene 14, at the Italian border, Andrea presents himself to customs officers. While they examine the documents and belongings, Andrea chats with a boy who is preparing to torment an old woman whom he thinks is a witch. Andrea questions at the boy for evidence that the woman is truly a witch and is able to counter each of the boy's arguments with a logical and reasoned explanation. Finally, Andrea lifts the boy to the window to look in and see with his own eyes that the shadow of a broomstick he saw is really just the shadow of the ladle the woman is using to stir her pot of porridge. The customs officers return Andrea's arguments and that the boy continues his tormenting of the woman shouting, "She's a witch!" Andrea tells the boy to think it over and goes on his way. Then you say that the drama is based on the various levels. As in this drama, we find the persecution theme analysis. Modern readers are accustomed to the rigors of the pre scientific debate, which allows for a variety of viewpoints so long as the data exists to reinforce one's position. That is, of course, always true because challenging the church is nothing but challenging the papacy. So, what we find in the life of Galileo is freedom of thought and speech and expression lies at the heart of the life of Galileo. From nearly the first moment that Galileo first explains his discoveries, he's cautioned that he risks retribution of the Catholic Church. And that means what? He would be put to death if the church does not approve of what he believes it to be. His science and church's sciences are different. The church might not be responsible if Galileo is pronounced dead. The moral responsibility of the scientist is not what is it that we get in Brecht's Lives of Galileo. The famous astronomer and the title character Galileo frequently demonstrates a lack of concern for the impact of his discoveries on the other people. In scene 4, when Galileo is presenting his telescope and his philosopher asks Galileo to consider where his research is leading, Galileo poses a question in turn. Are we, as scholars, are concerned with where the truth might lead us? Aghast, the philosopher responds. Mr. Galileo, the truth might lead us anywhere. So throughout the play, Brecht, Galileo prioritizes the pursuit of scientific truth above everything except his own survival, while other characters express concern for the impact of his research, calling him the Bible killer, or pondering the breakdown of the socio-political structure. Galileo purchases his research onward. He does not even concern himself with the impact of his work on his own daughter, whose happiness and married life he casually sacrifices by refusing Ludovico's request that he stops his research. So Brecht's play asks the reader to consider whether the scientist has a responsibility to consider the consequences of his research, to think about the moral responsibility of the scientist. Although first composed in 1938 in Denmark, the version of the play most commonly read in English is the second, 1947 edition. This play contains small revisions made in the wake of the end of the World War II, 1939-45. As Brecht puts it, Galileo's crime can be regarded as the original sin of modern physical science. So the atomic bomb, both as a technical and social phenomena, is the classical and the end of the product of the contribution to science and its failure to society. So the life of Galileo challenges the reader to consider whether the scientist is responsible for the consequences of his discoveries and even the unintended ones. So the life of Galileo has many symbols. Galileo's telescope is the first symbol, represents the division between the research and the observation-based method of science and the blind faith and obedience that adherence to a religious regime requires. So the telescope first appears simply as an instrument that can be used to see things far away. However, in scene 4, the telescope becomes the symbol of the conflict between Galileo's research and those who wish to deny it for any reason. Pope Urban VIII's vestments, Vestments. So in scene 11, we find that while Pope Urban 8 has a conversation with the Inquisitor. The Pope's servants dress him in papal robes for a formal appearance. So the stage directions indicate that he is playing the identity fable as the former Cardinal Barberelli in the beginning of the scene and almost completely obscured beneath the garments of his head. So the Pope, when he wears his garment, he is a different person. The old woman who is said to be the witch in scene 14, while Andrea is smuggling Galileo's books out of Italy, he encounters a boy who is tormenting a woman he claims to be a witch. When Andrea asks him what he is doing, the boy asks, relates stories that prove she is a witch, and Andrea refutes each of them with a logical explanation. Finally, Andrea lifts the boy to the window, proving that the shadow that appears to prove she's stirring hellbroth is in fact simply a shadow of an old woman stirring soup with a big ladle, not a broomstick. The story was the same as the allegory of the caves in Plato's The Republic, where the belief in shadows may be shattered by research into the origins of the shadows. The witch symbolizes ignorance, the woman's knowledge, and through research. So, this is what we learn about Galileo Galilei, the tortured scientist who has never been believed to do something really great for the society, even though he had done a lot to make us understand that we are wrong in our supposition of the theme that the earth is flat and all other planets move around the earth. Telescope is the means, the instrument by which Galileo explored the concept very well and made us believe what is right and what is wrong. Actually, the fact is this, that we, the people, do not have faith in the in science as we have in the papal, the church. So what they say, we think that they are right. So students are requested to read this what I have told you all. Yesterday also I have given a lecture on it. Today I have given it in details chapter wise. So that will be easy for you all to understand what you are studying. If you don't understand, then you will not be able to answer the questions that will follow later.